meeting of the CDA to order. First item of business is consideration of the September 4th meeting minutes. Do I have a motion on those minutes?
So moved.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, minutes pass. Thank you, everybody, and very good minutes, long, comprehensive minutes for that meeting. Next is consideration of the public assistance application and procedure. This, I believe, starts on page 7 of the packet. Memo from village staff. So Rebecca, maybe you could walk us through this, your research, how we got to this point, and then what we are looking for the CDA to do today.
Sure, absolutely. So over the last few months, the staff and Chair Hammond and President Rosick and I have met with 2 developers looking at different sites, 2 different sites in the village. And one developer specifically expressed interest in pursuing affordable housing that may be a consideration for the T1 extension fund. Both developers have expressed the desire to proceed with review of their proposals. So to do so, we've pulled together a phased public assistance application process and applications for the developers to use that we're looking for the CDA to consider today with a recommendation on them going to the board. It's primarily broken down into 3 phases. In order to develop these applications, what we did is we reached out to many communities around the state who have formalized documented processes for processing TIFs. Not all communities have an application. Not all communities have a documented process. So we reviewed those, picked out elements we thought would be good. Those were also reviewed with Michaela Hewitt, who is with Baker Tilly. She's also on the call today. She would be the individual from our financial advisor firm who would be processing and reviewing those applications. So I know in the past there's been a lot of discussion about what we receive, how it's reviewed. So the process tries to outline that in those 3 phases. And then what I had her do also is break that down into the different work that she would be doing in those phases once she received the application. So in general, we're trying to start with the end game in mind. What information do we need in each of these phases? And then trying to get that in a succinct way so that we can process it through.
Well, let me just on that point. So obviously we have two live inquiries here from developers. And so Rebecca did notify them that we were in the process of doing this, of putting together the application and the process. So they're aware of that and they know that they will need to sort of work through that process. We have a process. So again, they were appreciative of that because it makes it, I think, clear to them what the requirements are, what the deliverables are. It's, it's set in paper. I think it obviously helps us because we now have a process that we can walk them through. But I just want to make sure everyone understood that for these 2 current inquiries, they will be going through this process. Or, if we adopt it, I guess they will be utilizing this process. Yes, Trustee Stokbrand.
So when the Light Horse was built, did we not we couldn't use that process? We needed a new process, or why are we doing this now, but we already have subsidized housing at the lighthouse? Just for context.
Great question.
Yeah.
Can I answer that? Because that was actually going to be my next point. For those of you who are newer to the CDA, the village always had, they didn't have a documented process.
Right.
So that I could find. Maybe it's somewhere, but I don't know. If somebody has it, let me know. So what we're trying to do through this is also provide some ease of transparency for everybody, because what we know about our committees and the boards is that they change over the course of time. And so we wanted to kind of leave a record and also be really clear because we want to be good partners to work with. So for those people who are interested in doing business here, we want to share with them exactly what we need so that we can execute those reviews in a really timely fashion.
Thank you.
And I think the other part obviously is the cost component, that in the past, I believe the village has basically funded the financial analysis and all that. Obviously it's sort of come out overall, and now we're sort of specifically, which I guess, Rebecca, I think is consistent with other communities, that we are asking the developer to fund some of that cost associated with the analysis. So it's not on our dime. It's really on their dime, which I think is a good, obviously a good step to be clear about that and that the developers understand that from the beginning.
Is there any reason, like, can you let us know what properties are being considered and just generally what's being proposed? Is there any reason we can't just all know that information?
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why not. I mean, it's pretty general.
By
Bart,
the way,
you're
are we
gonna-
recording? We are recording. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Oh,
to ask.
thanks,
Yeah,
Bart.
yeah.
I always forget the recording.
I know.
So Bart, you're gonna have to clarify the address, but one of the properties is the tall building on the corner of Oakland and Capitol. It's an
The old
old,
Badger Bank building. The
3970, former North Shore Bank.
we're North Shore. Everyone has a different reference point for what.
Yeah, what about it?
A developer is looking at that site for a potential hotel.
Like redeveloping the existing building or building in the parking lot behind it?
Potentially both.
Both, yeah.
Okay, a hotel. Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and then the second, and Bart, you're gonna need to help me with address on this, but it's the Sunseekers building and
Okay, I know what it is, yeah.
more of a conglomerate, but that is the one that they're actually focusing on affordable housing, and it would be, they're looking at a partnership with Bethesda. So within that development, they are looking at allocating a number of those rental units, apartment rental units, for purposes of adults with developmental disabilities who have the capability to live on their own, but definitely need some assistance. So Bethesda then would also be property manager, bringing that skill set of not only being able to address and kind of guide some of those residents with some of their some of the needs or questions that they may have on a daily basis, but then the remainder of the property would then also be market rate. So the concept here from Bethesda is that they found that a lot of people, a lot of adults that have had developmental or do have developmental disabilities and can live on their own, their parents at times also want to come and live within the same development or have some level of presence later on. It doesn't, you definitely don't have to be put into either of these buckets to be in the development, but a portion of it is there and the resource component would be there. So they are the specific group who has been asked to evaluate the use of TID1 extension funds, but does meet one of the things that this group had wanted to explore. I want to just be clear that these applications and phases are labeled public assistance application because the same information we use to evaluate it within the scope potentially of a TIF would be the same type of information we would need to use to evaluate whether the use of extension of TID funds would also be appropriate.
Mike, did you have a question?
Yes, I just missed at the very beginning where the site was.
Oh, Sunseekers. And I think it's a building or two around it. I
Yeah, I think
gotta
there's.
get better at my addresses here.
Thank you. I know now. I just didn't hear that. Thank you.
And I had just a question about, so let's say we have this building on the Sunseeker site that is, some units are available for people with disabilities. It is conceivable then though that other people could snap up all the units because it says that there's the rest is market rate. Is it conceivable you could legally use the public assistance and it could all end up going to people who don't have those disabilities?
Well, anything is possible, but I don't believe that that's the intent of the CDA. So if
Right.
the CDA were to.
I know, of course it wouldn't be, but.
Right, so you would structure your agreement to prohibit that and to ensure that a certain amount remain
Okay.
for that use.
Rebecca, this is Michaela. Could I add to that?
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good morning.
Michaela, I didn't
No,
introduce.
that's okay. No, you did. You did. I apologize. I was, but I think to answer that question, typically they would designate. So based on whether it's affordable or for disabilities residents, they would designate a specific number of units. And so they would, typically they hold those units and there's a demand for it. And that's part of what they, part of their background research. But for the most part, they would designate the units for each of the anticipated uses. And so that would be, for the life of, and that's part of their mission typically. So they would be designated.
Okay. But back to process.
Okay, sorry. So process is broken down into 3 different categories: phase 1, phase 2, and 3. Phase 1 requires pre-meetings with staff prior to the phase 1 application issuance. So in this respect, Bart and I would meet with them like we typically do for everything else. We'd kind of do an initial screen. If we thought it would be viable, we'd provide the developer with a copy of the phase 1 application. Developer would submit that for staff and financial advisory review. And then a report would be provided back to the CDA, and the CDA would be asked to provide a recommendation to the village board. The board then would receive the recommendation. The village board would provide direction on whether the project warrants further exploration. If the developer chose to further explore with the village, they would then engage in phase 2, which would be the full financial analysis, underwriting, and presentation of proposed financial assistance, developer review, and term sheet. The CDA would provide a recommendation on those terms and development agreement to the village board. And then it would go to the village board in phase 3. And based upon, and this is where it's phase 3 is listed a little bit more generally, because based upon what type of assistance is being requested, there's a different process you would run through. So if it's TIF creation, we would follow the statutory process for TIF. If it's extension of TID funds, we'd work with the village board. And then if the development had any type of zoning related impacts, and those we'd be running through the plan commission. So that was a whole bunch of different statutory references to make there, but that's where it would go, and it would be dependent based upon the application. So I want to
ask a quick.
Yep.
Right,
Yep.
could I just ask on the just, I was looking at this last night on the phase 2, so step 5. I'm just trying to figure out. So the CDA would go to the board for review of the application, and the board would provide any other direction. And then then step 6, if the determination was made on some public assistance or TIF, that the CDA would then go back to the village board for
With the
approval of
recommendation.
that as well.
correct.
Okay.
So one's more of a phase 1, you can
Yeah.
envision more of a conceptual review. Phase 2, a detailed review.
So phase 1 is just the CDA.
No, CDA providing recommendation to the board, and then the
In
board
case-
saying,
yeah.
yes, this warrants further review, or no, it doesn't.
Yeah, my initial, I think this is really good. And I I really like that we're laying out in a systematic way how we're going to evaluate things. I think that's a real step forward. One comment though is like phase 1, we're kind of asking for a lot of like detailed financial stuff that I'm wondering if we need it. I mean, I think for me, phase 1 is like, is this something the community's interested in? And that brings what is the public benefit of the project, that we would invest public funds? So I'm just wondering if we could just do that sort of higher, if phase 1 is more that higher level of like, how much interest and enthusiasm is there for a project? And then get into the nitty gritty of what, if any, financial contribution we would make towards it. So that was my only comment. Like, it seemed like a lot of numbers and financial analysis up front that we may or may not need.
You know what? I really appreciate your question, because that's a discussion that we had here internally. First, anyone who's going to be serious about doing business here will have they will have been running these type of numbers. So I do think that it is not out of the box to be asking for the information. But the reason why we want it at first blush for the conceptual review standpoint is because we also want to make that determination in phase 1 of, does this project need public assistance? Because it may be a really great concept, but one of the things that I've heard expressed from the CDA is, we want to determine, does it need public assistance, or could this project happen with just private equity? So the reasoning behind having the information was really to get to that question. But we're definitely open, and I'd like to, if we could, allow Michaela to comment on it a little bit, because we worked on the components of the application.
Well, I guess the reason I bring it up is because sometimes we jump to that phase of
Yeah.
how much, they need money, how much should we give them money, before we even like stop and say, how does this fit in with, like, do we need a hotel? I mean, is there a need within Shorewood for what are the advantages of it would help restaurants, it would, like, just thinking conceptually, and I worry about jumping too quickly into the, how much money do we give them, so that's what
And I think that's a great point. So phase one, we're doing exactly those two things. We're lining up their concept. And remember, it's the developer's choice to move forward with this application. Nobody's forcing anyone to move forward with an application, but we're saying they're going to have that pre-meeting with Bart and I. And I think that one of the things that we have been clear with, and I'll let Bart weigh in too, is that if they're requesting something that we don't feel meets or has been expressed as a desire by the CDA, we tell them. Because we don't want people to unnecessarily go through a process that has not been voiced or determined by the CDA and the board to be an objective of the village. And so that first round, we would be evaluating, how does that fit into our comp plan? How does it fit into our master plan? Is that something we've expressed a desire for? So that's a screen. And the second, before we even have the conversation of how much money should we give them, we're stepping back and saying, does it need public assistance?
well, they all do, I mean,
But David, your
Okay,
point is
go
well
ahead.
taken, that,
Yeah.
you don't want the financial analysis to be the priority from step one, right?
yeah, that's my
Yep,
point.
I
Exactly,
would agree.
Pete.
Yeah, yes, yep. I agree. And I feel like the process, I feel like the steps 1, 2, 1 and 2 sort of start with, does it meet our goals? Is it aligned with what we want to do? So that's, again, I think it's in David's point is to implementation of process. And so to me, that speaks to that first point. Is it strategically what we want to do? But then I agree, there does need to be a financial component, because you want to know as soon as possible, right? Is what they're asking for reasonable, or again, aligned, and we might as well know that as soon as possible. So I guess it doesn't limit us to do the strategic part if we get the financial information. But I agree, David, you just don't want it. As a group, our objective is to not strictly focus on the financial aspect of it as to whether it works or not. Our directive is broader than that, right? Did Michaela was there?
Yeah, I mean, I think your comments are valid. And maybe it's, with phase one isn't really making it's more of the way we look at it from the financial analysis is and it might be a 1A and 1B where, as you said, Rebecca, you and Bart kind of meet with them and do that pre-meeting. And I don't, does it meet the smell test? Is it, part of your planning aspects of it? But I think, it's also, to your point, is making sure, it's more of a thumbs up or thumbs down that it's a feasible project and it's worth pursuing further. And that's where that financial information comes in. So it's not necessarily indicating what the level of assistance might be, but it's more, do you have a project that's financially feasible? Does it meet all of your planning aspects? Is there a market for it? And it's sort of that exploratory due diligence before any recommendations can be made.
Okay. Thank you. Trustee Stropbrand, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I personally see no problem with getting some financial information right up front. It seems to me to be sort of due diligence, but I understand David's point.
Yep.
I don't see any deadlines in the whole document here. And so I'm wondering, first of all, we have two different deadline situations. The TID, a decision has to be made. We have to be able to vote by April, correct, of 2021.
Or before, yeah.
Or before. So, but in this whole process, is this the sort of thing besides that deadline that we have just in this particular situation with our TID? Is that something that you would put into this? So if you get done with phase one after phase one, then you'd have 60 days that you have, or 90 days, or so that, you know, you're not sitting with a developer who can't decide whether or not they want to go forward. Do they ever put any sort of timelines on these things?
You know, I did not consider putting a timeline on it for the developer. And I'm open, I'd like to think about that a little bit. And I'd be happy to. A part of the reason why it didn't come to my mind to begin with is because it's the developer's choice whether they want to move forward with the next step. So if they don't move forward, then I'm not working on it.
Right.
And there's plenty of other stuff to do. So I never, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just, you know, I shift then and I go to something else. But I can definitely, I guess I want to think about that a little bit. One of the things that and this is too in the weeds for you guys. But I you know, want to incorporate some of our specific meetings and timelines as a roadmap so that we know how to activate if this happens. So maybe I could think about it as we kind of prepare that. But
I guess I was thinking if we ever lucky enough to have 2 or 3 people looking at one site, you know.
Oh, great point, Kathy.
You know,
yep.
In dreamland.
I like dreams.
One thing that I'd like to know a little bit is the experience of the developer, if they've done other projects in other, you know, similar projects in other places, or you know, just to have some idea of their experience. Well, there was something else. Now it's too early in the morning for me. Now I'll think of it in a minute.
David, we started at 9 for you.
Yeah.
Oh, I know what it is. Well, I have teenagers now. I don't have little kids, so no one in my house is up until like 10:30 unless they can help it.
Ooh, that's early.
Comparables. So for stuff like the income, like if we're doing a, you know, assisted living or something, what comparables did they look at, or would they think would be comparable, so we can, you know, look at some other for checking their revenue calculations and stuff.
Great question. We actually addressed that in a little bit in phase 1 and phase 2, and I'm going to have Michaela speak to it.
Okay.
Right, and no, and that is a good question. And to respond to that, typically what we do when we're analyzing the request for assistance, you know, we ask for the financial information, primarily the sources and uses of funds, and then their operating pro forma, which includes, you know, the projected rents and lease rates, depending on the type of project that it is. And then what we do is we do compare what their assumptions are for the rents, for example, and as well as operating expenses and all the components of that to really understand, you know, are they understating the performance, which would drive up their need for assistance, you know, based on understating what their rents are or overstating expenses, things like that. So within the financial review that we do so we take their original assumptions and then we sensitize them, we compare them to market comps for both the operations of the project as well as what the projected returns are. There's metrics out there that we rely upon to understand, you know, is this within market standards and how much of a deviation would they experience, which would then not warrant a need for assistance. So there's a lot of that analysis that is done as, you know, as part of this review. And then with specifically to your question about their experience and capacity, part of the review also within phase 2 is what we refer to as developer review due diligence. So that's exactly, you know, what you've alluded to as far as where have they done this before? What were the results of that? Do they have, and so it's really trying to understand 2 pieces of that. One, do they have the financial capacity to do the project that they're proposing here? So if you go through this process and determine that it warrants public assistance for some level, you know, do they actually have the means to be able to pull off this project? And that's both financial and experience from doing it in other places.
Well, I was just thinking for phase 1, like if I'm considering, you know, is this the right project for Shorewood? It would help me in phase, because I'm just thinking more generally, I'm not like down in the numbers quite yet. So it would help me to say, oh, well, we did this project in Minneapolis and we did this project in, you know, Glen Hills or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that just being able to look at it and that would be helpful, I think, just for the community and for the CDA and the board to say, yeah, this would fit, or no, it wouldn't fit. So I'm suggesting something, and or you could just ask them, but since we're laying everything out here so clearly, like, you know, have you done this before in other communities, can, you know, or what is a comparable project to this that we could consider?
That's a great point. You know, typically when people start talking to Bart and I, that's how they start the conversation.
Mhm.
They're like, you know, so there's one thing that they're looking at here, but they are showing us the good work that they're doing in other places. So we could just ask them to provide some links for references so people can see that work, because it's something that we look at.
Yeah.
You know, typically before we get on the phone with them, and then afterwards if we have more questions. So great suggestion.
And it's a good communication thing for the public of, like, you know, oh, here's what they did outside of Minneapolis, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
the
mean,
visual, I think, is also helpful.
the assisted living place down, I mean, when we looked at some of the, I mean, the design was very similar. So, you know, you really, you know, sometimes they just are kind of cookie cutter. So you can even look at that. Okay.
Any other questions on process? Again, there's a lot of work went into this, a lot of documentation. To David's point, you know, this is really what we've been looking for. Again, I think the developers are looking for this. I think this helps us as the community. It's just an all-around positive step.
Peter, I have a question.
Yes.
How did we come up with the numbers that we used here, the 5,500 and the 8?
I was just
Good
going to ask that.
Good question. Yeah.
Michaela, I'll let you speak to that.
That was our estimate of what it would take to do the financial review. And so I think in starting the conversation of having the developer provide the upfront financing to process the application. So that's where those amounts came into, as far as what the estimated fees would be.
And from your review of other communities, is that aligned with what other communities request? Would you say?
Yes, and we had conversations, you know, kind of they're all over the board, you know, as far as the kind of that's kind of a broken record statement, but unfortunately it's true where they are. But I mean, this is in the ballpark of what's realistic for, you know, and that's kind of why you split it into the two parts where, you know, in some cases a community will ask for everything up front, and then, you know, and provide a refund, which can get kind of cumbersome. So in this case, that's where we talked about doing a phased approach of it minimizes the upfront, but then they're still responsible if we move to phase 2. So it's within reason of what a lot of communities are where they're at.
And sorry, just one other, I forget, I'm sorry. Is the 8,000, is this phase 2 component potentially sort of refundable if the project moves forward? Do I remember that correctly?
Yes, we state
Yep.
within the scope of the application that the board will ultimately make the decision as to whether those fees, if the project would go forward, would get refunded to the developer through a TIF or some extension, but that it's on a case-by-case basis, so the board's not really locked into anything. And that's
That would-
only, again, if the project is successful,
That would be true for the both phase 1 and phase 2 pieces?
potentially,
Okay.
up to the board's discretion.
Got it. Okay.
I just wanted to I would make clear that this is not the sum total of what may be asked in terms of financial information, because I know, like with the Metro Market deal, it was really structured through a lease, and there were a lot of, you know, there was a lot of complexity about the lease, and there was one lease for the grocery store and a different lease for the parking garage, and, you know, I'm sometimes these can get pretty complicated, and I'm not sure that having a single generic, you know, request for information the way this is going to cover every situation and the possible complexities of the deal. So I would just, you know, be clear that, you know, this is not the sum total, that if there's additional questions we have about a lease, for example, or something else, that they may be asked for other things, or maybe in there already. I didn't read it that closely. But.
You know, I can definitely make that another highlight, particularly on phase 2, because we expect that, you know, during the course this, we tried to, and again, the documentation's put together so we can be as clear with people as possible.
Mhm.
We want to be a good village to work with, you know, and a part of that is just being clear and transparent for everybody so everyone knows where they're at. But we definitely understand that, and I can make an additional footnote or make that, pull it out so it's a little bit more visible.
And what about so I assume this is not public record then, the information they give us on this, or is it? I don't know.
So you'll notice that in some, particularly in phase 2, Michaela also has that some information goes directly to the financial advisor, so it will not be held here. I let her know that there's just some documentation. I don't, people always think that we know everything. I prefer not to have everybody's information here because that will be her role to take a look at. So there are some specific pieces that will be sent directly to Baker Tilly. But the
I get that.
application will come back here.
So some information direct to Baker Tilly, which would then make it not subject to public disclosure.
Correct, we would not have it here.
Well, I mean, but contractors are, so the contractors who are doing work for us are subject to open records too. I just think you should think about that, because, you know, that's another area where, you know, when does it become public, and what are they willing to give us, and whether it's public record or not is something we should, you know, think about.
Great suggestion. I can follow up with Bruce Black on that.
Yep, I think that's it's a good point. I think typically while you're negotiating, and of course they will opine while you're negotiating, it's not public, but then once if you provide the assistance, and there's a level of what becomes public. But I think, you know, in some cases, particularly if we're getting into kind of the financial capacity review, what we have done in other instances is if we sign a non-disclosure agreement, you know, with the developers, so that they send us financial information, we analyze it, we provide the results to the board and CDA, but we don't disclose specific financial information. So it's really the results of that review. So it's kind of a case, and I don't know how sensitive some of these developers might be, but that's really more like if you're into these, like, for example, like a water park analysis or something crazy, you know, where they just don't want that information out in the street. So then that's where we would sign these confidentiality agreements. We look at the documents, we provide the results, but it's never, sometimes it's not even in our hands either. It's more of just review. But I don't foresee, for the most part, the information we're asking for in this application, it's all, it's generally not super sensitive. It's just when we get into kind of the financial statements or the personal financial statements, if there's a guarantee or something. And then if there's sensitivity about it, that's where we would work with your attorney. We'd work with them and say, how can we make everybody comfortable with this?
Well, I mean, I think like a review of a project, like where we're doing kind of an initial review of whether we want to do it or not, or whatever, what they're asking for in terms of TIF, you know, so there's kind of like a review, but then there's an actual negotiation phase. And I think negotiation is not subject to the public, but where do we shift from we're taking a first look at this to where we're in negotiation? I just think it's something we should, you know, think about and maybe address in here as to, you know, what that they maybe just a statement like this may not be private, you know what I mean? This may be subject to public, to Freedom of Information Act. So, you know, just to warn them about it. I don't know, but it's something you'd have to ask Nathan about, but
yeah.
And also I think, you know, I think it's important that people that we don't, I mean, you know, things used to be done very much under wraps until it was time to pull off the, you know, the cloth and show what was underneath. And I think that contributed a little bit to, I mean, I think people want to know what's being considered, and to have a more open process with the public, we can't be so secretive about it, you know, but understanding that we're not going to put people's financials out for the public to see, but what should we be letting people know about and getting input on, and what should we be more closed about?
I think that's a great point, because it gets back to expectations.
Yeah.
You know, if people have an expectation that they're going to see everything, they won't. So I'd rather be clear up front, to your point, David, about, you know, because moving forward, you know, we're going to have, well, I think of this in like long term. I want to work with you guys forever, but I know that some of you may not want to work doing this forever. So as new people come on, I want a very easy document that they can look at to say, oh, okay, this is what I can expect to see and not expect to see. Great
Well,
point.
and I also think, you know, what we're working on here is sort of, to me, the interaction with the developer, between the community and the developer, or us as the bodies and the developer. But there is likely another document which is an internal to staff and maybe CDA, which is sort of a desktop procedures type of thing. I think that really walks through more of the details about the house. And I think in there is some of the things about, you know, when are we notifying the public? You know, how are we, what's our process with respect to how we take this from point A to the end? You know, that's not necessarily on the developer, that's more on how we're gonna run this. So I feel like there's another, you know, as we, again, that to me is a slightly separate step. So staff, to me, already probably has in their head how it's gonna work, what the steps are, when they're gonna come to us, those things. And I think, again, we document that to some degree down the road and have that as our, David, to your point, our agreement about how does this work. And then the public knows as well, at least as much as possible.
Right, but we don't want to give the developer an expectation that, you know, their their pro forma on the project is not going to be public when our intention is that we're not, you know, it is public. So I don't want to give them the impression that.
Okay, yeah.
But I agree. I think that would be an excellent, and maybe when we talk about TIF policies, the next meeting, that can be part of the TIF policies of, you know, where is the curtain drawn, and at what point is the curtain drawn, and that we have a real reason for doing that.
Yep, I agree, yeah.
Chairman Hammond, I would
Yeah.
agree. I mean, one of the reasons we're finally doing this is because it was done behind the curtain for a long time, and this is our chance to fix it, make it public, make it transparent, and so that there's accountability. And so we want to make sure we get this piece right. And I think you can add a phrase that makes it clear that we could ask for other documents that's not included in the list. But we definitely want to be as transparent and accountable as possible. Always err on that side.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, I totally agree with that statement. This is, to me, every time it's a balancing act between the developer and keeping certain thing. Again, there's competitive issues here. There's a lot of things going on, and the public's need to know. And that's, to me, the balancing act that we have to play for every opportunity that's going to come in front of us. And I'm not sure we can lay out a specific document that is, well, I guess at a high level it could be, but not necessarily at a detailed level that we could apply to all cases and feel like it's going to work. I feel like each case could be slightly different, but I agree the goals are the same. The goals are to respect the developer's element of privacy and competitive advantage, and our obligation to be as transparent as possible with the community. I think that's, to me, just our ongoing challenge that we're going to have with these projects.
And breaking it into phases is that's one of the reasons why I think it's also helpful to do, because your meetings are open to the public. The board meetings are open to the public.
Right.
You are making recommendations on these things in a conceptual standpoint, and then at the next stage in public meetings, we just want to be really clear, so we allow people the opportunity to know how and when they engage and can have the opportunity to do so. And then in addition to that, we'd also have the outlined statutory TIF process, that if that was a mechanism used, or, whether it be zoning engaged, we would have that outlined as well. So the intention here, and I kind of have to laugh because you reference curtains, and I just don't do decorating at all. So it would just be a clear open window for me. And I wouldn't be able to pick out any of that other stuff. And so we would just, here's what we're going to do. Here's what you can expect from us. I just want to be really clear about it. And I think that we have a great group that understands and agrees with that. So I think that will be easy to accomplish.
Okay, I want to be respectful of people's time. It's 9:40. Obviously, again, there were a lot of documents here. I know, Rebecca, were there other components in here you were going to go through? I know just one other item we wanted to note is, I don't know if everybody saw, but it was the phase 1 application, correct? Was inadvertently not included in the packet. Rebecca did send it this morning, so we would We would like to, I think, have that as part of the consideration, but I don't know if everybody had a chance to look at that. Again, it's fairly straightforward. I think she sent an email out at about 8:48 this morning with the application. So maybe, sorry, I just did two things. So first, Rebecca, are there any other specific items you wanted to cover in all this information? Let's address that first.
No, I think the thing that I'm looking for today, and which is located in a passable motion, if you're comfortable making one, would be to recommend the public assistance application process and associated fees to the board for approval.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the CDA? And then can I ask,
I don't have any other questions. I think everything, great job, the staff and everyone who put all this stuff together. Very thorough, great discussion. Sorry, I'm not participating all that much, but honestly, you guys are asking all the questions I had, so I don't really
well, and that's a good
else to ask.
That's a good point, John, because we are interested in your and Dusty's, having experience in this area. So it's good to hear that you feel like it's kind of addresses the key things and you don't see any major gaps here or things. So that is helpful.
Yeah, I think,
When he's done.
I still have my reservations on whether or not this can actually, affordable housing as we think we want it can actually come to fruition in the time frame that we have available within extending this TIF or TID. But I'm certainly not opposed to it. I think it's worthwhile getting some of the stuff down on paper so that if and when we do want to move forward with it, it's there. I think we've got some real challenges in the village and everywhere in this country with tax revenue issues. So, I don't see any reason not to proceed right now with this, but I think overarchingly, there are some things to consider about whether we close TIDs or keep them open to get more revenue flowing into the village and things like that. So a separate issue, and I do not want to get into a discussion on that here, but just wanted to make that clear that I'm not 100% on board with this, but it's worthwhile pursuing.
Well, Trustee Storkman, let me just one point on that, John, just to be clear to everybody, maybe it's obvious to everybody. So this process goes beyond the TID extension question, right? This will be our process moving forward with respect to any question for public assistance, regardless of the TID extension. So this will be our policy.
Right. That's why I'm in favor. I'm in favor of this for sure. I think it's related but separate. I understand.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Good. Sorry, Trustee Storkman.
I agree with Mr. Kraus. This might be too much in the weeds, but under phase 2, part 2, number 11, land use, is there a reason that there's no residential component, no housing, it's retail, office? Is that just always, I'm not a real estate person, so, because I thought we're mostly talking about affordable housing here, so why would we not have a category for residential housing, rental, owner occupied? Maybe that's an industry standard. I'm confused. It's on page 14 of the packet.
Yep, I'm on the packet. I saw that and what you're seeing. I thought that there was a residential component there, but if not, I can go back and add it.
It may be, I don't know. It may be someone in the industry would know. Is that not a common category for?
I believe it's a common category. So we can add that. Thank you, Kathy.
So are we taking a vote on
Yes.
this?
I'm looking for a motion.
So Rebecca, what you just stated earlier, maybe you want to restate it. That's what we're going to make a motion on, correct?
Yep, it's actually, well,
Page 8.
that's within your
Page 8.
purview.
Yep.
It's on page 8.
Towards the bottom, action required, recommended, the possible motion. So.
And I think it comes with two levels of understanding. Number one, we're going to ask for the developer to provide some examples of recent projects that they've accomplished in other communities.
Yes,
And then we're also going to do a deeper dive to evaluate what would be disclosed and not disclosed, and how to word that within the scope of the application, which I'm happy to follow up on and do.
Yep. And the clarification that additional financial information could be requested.
Yes, that's in there already, but I would
Okay.
pull it out and highlight it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, David, I don't want to
I'll
interrupt
just
you.
say, okay, I move to recommend the public assistance application process and associated fees with the edits that Rebecca mentioned to the village board for approval.
Have a second?
I would second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? I got a dusty thumbs up. Take that as an aye. That's good. I like that. Okay, that motion passes. Thank you very much for that. And staff and Michaela, thank you so much. This is really great work. I think it'll really help us moving forward. Okay, then moving on to item 4, update on housing program opportunities. Sorry, I'm just getting my packet. Rebecca, I don't know if you want to, again, this was more of an update to the CDA discussions. So if you want to maybe take us through that.
Correct. So update only,
18.
this is a, oh, I'm sorry.
Right, page 18, sorry.
Yep. Update only, this is a work in progress, but one of the requests particularly is that if we were going to take action to extend TID 1 for purposes of affordable housing, the CDA had wanted programs for consideration that we would use for that purpose. Now, what we had just got done talking about was the larger concept, right? Because we had some lengthy discussion at our last meeting of the fact that we're not a large municipality, so we don't have separate departments for housing or to run, we don't have a whole TIF department. So when we look at the possibility of providing programs, what we're doing is reaching out to other people who are in the business of providing these programs to seeing if there are synergy points and ways that we could structure a third-party administration with them to deploy these programs if there's something that the village chooses to do. Now, a lot of that will come down to the financial component. I know that Chair Hammond and Bart and I have gone through, our most recent conversation was with WIBIC, seeing if they would be, potential fit for a third-party administrator, and a lot of it comes down to funds. How much are you willing to pay to have someone administrate it based upon how much you have available to actually make an impact? So what I wanted to just update you on are that these are the ones that we are currently reviewing. A part of the suggestions that came forward came at the of our request of both ESAB to provide a recommendation to address their request of modifications for seniors and homes. So we'll be exploring one program with them, and then the Conservation Committee, who also had proposed a program before. And while taking a look at that program, I ultimately ended up reconnecting with the city of Milwaukee, who currently has a department just focused on energy grants. And there are people who do that there. We're going to be following up. It will be our second conversation next week, primarily looking at how their financial relationship is structured with Summit Credit Union. What we talked about in the past is that we do not want to be the financial arm associated with any type of loan because we're not primarily in the loan business. And there's a lot of financial protocols that go along with that. So we're going to be taking a look at how that relationship started, if it was RFP'd, and a lot of the work that we're going to do here is also laying the groundwork for coming back to look at the neighborhood loan program, which was the last priority on our list. But yet, as I kind of evaluate each program and have the discussions, it's something that's reticent in my mind, because in all of these program options, we would be looking for third-party administration services. So again, none of these are coming to you for action. There's also another one that I know Trustee Amenta was kind to bring to our attention that I had some preliminary conversation with the city of Milwaukee, but the Metropolitan Milwaukee Fair Housing Council. So we've extended reach to them as well. they have a revolving loan program. They actually set up the program and the framework that the city uses at this point in time. So we've extended an outreach to them as well to learn about how that's done and how potentially evaluate if that could or could not be an option that we could proceed with. So more to come in December.
I really appreciate the page on the Novogradac recommendations. But I had a question about the continued down payment assistance program, because I thought we got very little interest in that program.
I am so on purpose, because at your last meeting, there was the request that the CDA eliminate the duplex conversion program, correct, Bert?
Yeah.
And then one of the things that we had also talked about is that we never talked about attic conversion. So instead of listing it on this agenda, because we really wanted to make progress with the things that we had on the agenda today, which was primarily the TIF or the public assistance process, we're going to do a more comprehensive review of those and then bring them back to you all at once so that we can hopefully get some direction on all three. And this, just so you know, that Novogradac housing study recommendations, while you as a group haven't formally adopted them, I just wanted to be really clear about what we're doing or not doing on each one based upon how we agreed to work on our first priority, second priority, third priority. It's just, for me, it's an easy way to organize it. And I think that people ask that question, which is, we've invested in this housing study. What are you doing with it?
Right.
Well, this is exactly what we're doing with it.
But the two at the under affordable housing easing zoning rules, why are they connected to the TIF extension? I mean, we can ease the zoning rules, and that doesn't really involve subsidies at all necessarily.
Correct, it doesn't. But what we did as a group, and because we also have limited staff time, we agreed that the first item we were going to tackle was whether or not to extend TID 1 for purposes of affordable housing. Second, we were going to work on a process for public assistance that included an application and a policy. And third was going to be reviewing the neighborhood loan program. So I would say that the zoning component of this would be something that the group would need to prioritize as a fourth, and would likely not be done by this group because of the zoning. That would likely be done by the Planning Commission. And Bart, you can correct me if I'm wrong with any of that.
Correct. And I've communicated to the Plan Commission that those recommendations won't be acted on until the comprehensive plan is drafted and done. So we have an idea of, all the zoning changes that are looked at. So we're in that process right now, hopefully to have that reviewed and approved early next year. So after that is done, then the Plan Commission will start tackling some of those issues. And if they choose, to tackle that one first, so be it. But they will have a lot of recommendations within that comprehensive plan to look at, hopefully early next year.
And David, to your point, I'm actually going to change that, because that is, I see where you're questioning that. I'm going to instead put in there that the Plan Commission will review after comp plan approval.
Yeah, that's not.
I think that makes it clear. You pulled out a really good point. I appreciate that.
It's the Plan Commission, but it's also something we can do, without any money that would be helpful. So, okay. Looks good to me.
Yep. All right. So so that's the update. So we will be seeing things obviously in future meetings, all this coming together, right? Based on all this research that you're doing.
Correct. So I guess leads to the last point, which is we delayed this meeting in October. Typically we meet the first Friday in November. We have a meeting that would originally been scheduled for November 6th. And at that meeting, the intent would be to review a draft policy for public financial assistance. So we have a draft, we can be ready to go with that, but that would be the sole purpose of that meeting if there was still availability of people to meet.
Yeah. So again, from staff's perspective, you have a draft that you are comfortable putting in front of the CDA at this point?
Well, I have a draft, whether you like the draft. It's a compilation of reviewing. I've got a binder of probably 8-9 different municipalities that we've been reviewing. all larger. I'm trying to keep it simple. So it kind of hits some highlights, but I'm not going to know what direction to go in unless I get something in front of you
Yes.
that we can start having that dialogue with. And I'm ready if you're ready.
Okay, so that's 2 weeks away or our next scheduled. So just making, again, so I feel like you're saying, you know, you are in our meetings, you hear what we're talking about, but you feel like you have, the draft is in an acceptable place to put in front of us for consideration. So then I agree, I don't see a reason to not have the November 6th meeting. It only gets harder after that towards the end of the year. So I feel like we might, and we have to keep this moving forward. So I would propose to the CDA that we hold the November 6th meeting, and that's where we consider the TIF. And again, the TIF policy document, it's likely to take at least 2 meetings. I would, you know, maybe a discussion meeting and then I don't know. We'll have to see. It's a big document. It's a big concept. So it'd be great to get it done in one meeting, but go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, please know that it's just, it's a start in the direction. So, because there's a lot of diverse views on this. So I'm going to try to put in front of you something so that we can get to what we want it to be. Maybe it fits all the bills, right? You know, right initially. It's not, it's actually not, after going through a lot of review of policy, that there's not a lot of mystery to this.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the 6th works for me, and could you, if you have it, can you get it to us a little earlier than a few days before?
yes,
I mean, if you have it,
Yes.
just send it out now, because I mean, it's something that I would look in detail. And also, if you could just give us links to the other policies that you looked at, the other municipal policies, then we can.
Okay, and just one other, I mean, obviously we're coming up with some good stuff here. Just a reminder to all of us that, you know, these are not written in stone. Once we, you know, this is ongoing work. We're going to continue to, I think, upgrade and improve and modify both the things we just approved as well as the policy. So I always get the phrase wrong, but you know, let's not let the enemy of the perfect be, or let the goal of the perfect be the enemy of the good here. I think, you know, focusing on that in order to get things in place, which I feel like we just did with this support program. That's the way we should look at the policy document as well. So, okay, so if everybody's comfortable, yeah, I agree. Staff gets it out to us as soon as possible, and we consider that, review it, and consider it at the November 6th meeting.
What time are we going to meet? What? I know
6:30 a.m.
Mike likes the 9 o'clock with me. She's with me on 9 o'clock.
That works
9
for me.
o'clock is good for me
Okay,
too.
Yeah.
I can make that work.
It's fine by me.
excellent.
Super. All right, I got on my
Trustee
calendar.
Stokbrand, is that good for you? Yes, okay.
okay, so I will plan on sending the information out to you by mid next week. I just want to compile a memo, and then, because I didn't know what place we were going to be at today, and some links to that information. So give me some time to do that. I'm not going to be able to work on that today.
Okay.
But happy to do that, and we'll get it out.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Alrighty.
guys. Oh,
Okay.
that we need a motion to adjourn.
Yes, 9:59. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
I have a second.
Seconded.
Oh, hi, Steph. All right.
And can I just say, I think this is the first time in the history of the CDA that we've ever finished on time.
That's not true. There was one other time. There was one other time.
Thank you, staff.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
All right, we are
Bye.
adjourned. Thank
Have a
you,
good
everybody.
weekend.
Have a good day, everybody.
You too.
Bye.